This episode of the Multiracialverse podcast is brought to you by Evertan Katora, a brand born from a powerful vision and a deep connection to heritage. Founded by Shinnecock brothers Jason Tech King and Weyhan Moon Smith, Evitan represents resilience and pride. From handmade tie-dye to wellness-focused athletic wear, each piece is crafted with intention and positivity, smudged with sage for good vibes, and delivered to you with love. Join the Evitan family on their journey of empowerment and inspiration. Hit up Moon on Instagram at Evitan_KS. That is native spelled backwards _KS to view product and place an order. Evertan Katora. Feel the spirit of resilience in every stitch.
And I was teased when I went on the powwow trail and I would dance, and I was teased just because maybe I looked different. I ain't, like you said, I didn't look like your typical, stereotypical indigenous person. You know, I had darker skin and I had wavier hair. And so I was even teased when I danced at powwows. You know, I got called the N-word, right? And then I would go back home and I was getting teased because I wore my hair long and I had a braid, and my cousins would tease me about that, tease me how my hair texture was and how my braids look, and that hurt, man.
Welcome back to the Multiracialverse podcast, the space where we explore the diverse experiences and journeys of multiracial and multicultural individuals and their allies from around the world. I'm your host, Antonio Fernandez, and I'm thrilled to bring you another inspiring episode. Today, in episode 9, we have a truly remarkable story to share with you, one that embodies resilience, determination, and the power of reclaiming one's dream against all odds. Meet Weyhan Moon Smith, co-founder of the brand Evertan Katora, a company born out of a dream shared by two Shinnecock brothers, Jason Tech King and Weyhan Moon Smith. But the tragedy struck in April of 2012. Tech's sudden passing halted the production of Evertan Katora. It seemed like the dream had come to an abrupt end. However, in January of 2018, something miraculous happened. Moon, battling addiction and searching for purpose, had a spiritual awakening that reignited the flames of Evertan Katora. With the encouragement of Tech's daughters, Heaven and Jacene, Moon embarked on a journey to fulfill their shared dream. To Moon, Evitan, which spells native backwards, was more than just a fashion statement. It symbolized the enduring spirit of indigenous people, honoring their past struggles and triumphs. Balancing his pride and heritage and always present culture of the American way and battling addiction to boot, Moon's journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Today, as Moon walks the red road of sobriety, he not only keeps Tech's dream alive, but he also expands the vision of Evertan Katora. Join us as we delve into Moon's extraordinary journey of overcoming adversity, finding purpose, and inspiring others to follow their dreams no matter the circumstances. Get ready for a conversation filled with hope, resilience, and the power of reclaiming one's destiny. Welcome to the Multiracialverse, Weyhan. How you doing today?
What's going on, my brother Antonio? I'm doing great, man. I appreciate this opportunity. Grateful you said my name and you said it correctly. So I appreciate that, my brother. So
Awesome.
Before we go any further, let me just introduce myself in the way that I was told and taught to do so, and that's in my traditional language. So, Akwe Matampia, Gwana Kisa, Kwana Tusuas, Shinnecock Natushie. Hello, relative. Good day. My name is Weyhan, aka Moon. Which my name, Weyhan, is in my language, and if you translate it, it means the moon. And I come from the Shinnecock Nation, which is located out in Long Island, New York, man. And again, I'm humbled and I'm appreciative, showing gratitude for this opportunity, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, me too. I reached out and I started researching your background. We met and it was like instant, like you felt like a friend. And you know, we were talking and then you shared about your heritage. Yeah. And it was so interesting. And as soon as we were done talking, then I started to look up more about your heritage, where your roots are from and everything. It's so amazing. So thank you for making time. I know that we had an opportunity either now or like 3 weeks from now. I was like, no, I want to do it now. I don't want this opportunity to get away. So I really, really appreciate you making time today.
Yeah, no doubt.
Excellent. So what language was that, really quick? You were speaking.
Yeah, so that's in my language, the Shinnecock language, which Shinnecock is part of a larger band of tribes throughout the Northeast. And that band is called the Algonquin Band. And so the Algonquin Band, there's different tribes in the Northeast that go up. You could say New York, and then Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, even up into Canada, as well as over into the Great Lakes area, like Minnesota. So we have, different tribes that all speak a similar dialect of the Algonquin language. I just want to point this out. I remember I was actually upstate New York in Akwesasne, which is way upstate, right there on the border of New York and Canada. And I went to a powwow. And as I was going around looking at the different vendors, a woman, she greeted me and she said, Akwe. And I knew exactly what she said because that's how we say hello, Akwe, in our language. And she was from the Cree people up in Canada. So we were relatives.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Yeah, so let's take a quick step back a little bit, I guess, earlier in time, because I do want you also to share when you share about your parents' background and your heritage and ethnicity, possibly also to maybe share just how old the Shinnecock and Algonquin bands and tribes are, and how long they've been here in this part of the United States where you live.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up, on the Shinnecock territory. Both my mother and father are Shinnecock. We are one of the oldest documented tribes in the United States, right? I can attest to that. We're one of the oldest documented tribes, and we are not called a reservation because our land was never reserved by the federal government. So if you was to come to our nation and you was to come on our land, it would say Shinnecock Nation territory, right? It's not going to say reservation. It will say our territory. Right? And the reason for that is because, again, we were never reserved by the federal government. Now, that doesn't say that we weren't, our land wasn't taken, because it was. It was our land that we actually live on now and that we actually reside on has been smaller, like tremendously smaller than what our ancestors lived on, obviously, right? And that goes back to roughly around 1640 or earlier is when we first met what we call the visitors. The Europeans came across the water, and you can actually go to the exact spot in which our people met them. And there's a place called Conscious Point, and that's in Sag Harbor, right? And you can that's where we actually met the first visitors, right? And that's where it began, right? That's where they began. Wow. That's where civilization began and whatnot, right? But we were still, even though the land was any smaller, we were never moved. So when I go back home, right? So I live in Albuquerque now. When I go back home, I can go to the same exact waters that my ancestors harvested when they went out clamming, right? Same exact waters. Just imagine how powerful that is, right? You feel it. When you put your that water, you feel it. You feel the power of our ancestors, right? So I grew up, like I said, on territory. Mom and dad from Shinnecock. I grew up in a traditional way, and what I mean by that, I grew up in ceremony. I grew up singing and dancing at powwows, and my mother and father instilled that in us. Like my childhood was spent traveling the country, singing and dancing at powwows, which I am forever grateful for.
Wow. That's amazing. What were you taught in school as far as, were you taught more traditionally about the history, or was there any push from, like the American government or other to say that you have to have, the Shinnecocks have to teach this particular type of curriculum when you were in school, like in primary school?
Yeah, so I went to a regular public school in Southampton, New York, right? So, all my cousins were there, right? And so it was predominantly Caucasian, right, students there. But one thing I will say, like we were taught that's a regular, history, right? Not too much about books, not too much about the Shinnecock, right? We weren't really taught that, right? But I will say this. I will say that I do remember being able to share our culture in school. right? I remember doing talent shows and dancing in our traditional way. In our, I would dance what is called fancy dance, which is a powwow dance, right? And I remember doing talent shows and winning talent shows, but that was based off of our culture, right? So in
Yeah.
some way,
Yeah.
also respected in some way, right? It was respected. I remember going to high school and participating and I'm not sure how to say this, but I guess you could not a show, but it was a presentation, right, of our culture, our dances, our songs, right? And again, that was allowed, right? Which kind of made us feel good, right? It definitely made us feel good, right? Like we knew who we were. We were Shinnecock people, and we wanted to be acknowledged for being Shinnecock and be recognized that we still hold our cultural values and we still practice our cultural ways. And it was good for the school to allow us to share that with others.
That's great that there was some respect, like some mutual respect for that culture. And because nowadays, like some schools shut everything down. It's one way or no way.
No, but it's 100%. And I mean, and there's always been conflict, right? There's always been conflict in the system and whatnot. And we do have tribal liaisons that try to come in and support our indigenous students. Like we do learn different, right? We do learn different. There are things that we do want support in, right? And even one of the things that our youth did, and I was actually a part of. I used to be part of what is called a youth council, right? And it was a bunch of youth in our community. We came together and we did a lot of community events. It was a leadership group, and we had them travel throughout the country, participating in cultural exchanges with other tribes, and even other cultures, right? And so, actually, my niece, she had wrote a paper in regards about Columbus Day, what that meant to her, right? And so the teacher found that it was a pretty profound paper. And so what they did is the youth came together and they said, we want to fight to have Columbus Day changed to Indigenous Peoples Day within the school system. And so they put on their traditional regalia. They got a board at the school board meeting and they presented. And sure enough, they made a change in their school, and that's not to from those who celebrate Columbus Day, because I know that there are some recognize him and whatnot, but from what it means to indigenous people, we will also like to have that respect as well, and so they felt and they went about it and they advocated, right? So it taught them advocacy and leadership and taking the initiative to fight for what they believe in, and sure enough, they got something changed in the school system.
That's amazing. That's so awesome to see. So just to clarify things for myself, and I'm first and foremost going to apologize if I ask anything that may be way too naive. You say the Shinnecock, you live in, you were raised in the nation territory of the Shinnecock people. Was that area similar to, in the way that it was governed, to the way that I say, for instance, I come from the Pacific Northwest. There are reservations or nations here that when you cross into them, you're crossing into a place that is considered the territory or land that is governed by an Indian council or their police. Was that similar to the way you were growing up? Because you did say you went to public school, but was that public school within that territory?
No, it was not. So the public school was open to everyone and anyone, right? So that's where, like, I guess you could say outsiders, like our neighbors all went to that school as well, right? So, but yes, we do have our own government. We are a sovereign nation, right? So what that means is that the United States government recognizes Shinnecock people as a sovereign nation. So we do government to government business, right? And so that also means we govern ourselves, create our own laws, right? Have our own protections, right? So it was. I remember going to tribe meetings. I remember going to tribe meetings growing up. I know that our government has changed, and you bring up a really good point, because just from hearing the stories of how it used to be before the visitors came, right? It was a matriarchal. I can't pronounce that word, but it was the women in our nation were the ones who ran the show, right?
Wow.
They said this is what needs to be done in our nation. You men go and execute it, right? So the women were the ones who seen the vision for our people,
Wow,
right?
that's awesome.
And then as time went on and the assimilation started to happen, we became what is known as the three trustee government. So it was three trustees who, and also a tribal council. And the three trustees came from the visitors, right? That was their way
Yeah.
of that, governing themselves, right? And I remember even the territory and having to go to the Southampton Town Hall to cast votes who was going to be the next leadership. So can you imagine that? We're a sovereign nation, right? But we have to go to the town hall and cast our votes to select our new leaders, right? But that all changed
Wow.
too. That changed in the
Yeah.
recent years. Changed to where everything is done on territory. Our votes are done on territory. Our elections are done on territory now, right? Using more sovereignty to empower ourselves. And I think that's where we're at now, is that we are taking the initiative to first get our land back, right? Taking the initiative to buy up our land, to fight for our land. There's a protest going on at home right now, trying to get land. So these are fights that are constant in our nation.
Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, it's you don't hear about this stuff, so that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I just think you have a beautiful spirit, and what you've shared with me about the Shinnecock people has just been beautiful, and I immediately wanted to go out and share it with everybody. Have you heard of these people? Like, it's amazing. Stepping back just a little bit, like, what did culture look like in your household? And let's get as basic as, religion, food, what kind of traditions, meaning also, you went to a public school, so obviously they probably celebrated Christmas and these other holidays that, American holidays, were those practiced within your household when you were young, as you were growing up?
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember. I mean, we celebrated Christmas like everyone else. We celebrated Christmas, and that probably was also influenced from my grandmother. My grandmother was definitely into the church. I also remember going to Sunday school as a young one. Well, I don't remember too much, but I do remember. I remember participating in the play at the church and whatnot, But we definitely celebrated that in the household. But also we celebrated what is called Nanawa, right? And Nanawa in our means harvest time. So that kind of is the equivalent to the American Thanksgiving. And those are really, really good memories, because that was like a community feed. Right. And it was the men that were in the kitchen cooking. It was the men that served. Right. And so I remember growing up, and I remember being like, that time of year was very exciting for us, especially if you were young, because you had folks from what is called our sister tribes. So what I mean by that is our relatives from up north, the Wampanoag, Mashpee people, our Narragansett relatives, right? They will come down across the water, and they would come celebrate with us, and we would sing, and we would dance, and we would eat, and we would just visit and share. And those were really, really good, fond memories, because that was who we were, right? Like, a lot of our ceremonies are based around food. None of us, the harvest time,
Yeah.
So that was something that was really traditional. And then I grew up on that drum. That powwow drum was a huge influence on my life. And that was my uncles, my uncle Wayne Duncan, and my dad and my uncles. They put us at that drum at a young age, and they didn't teach us. We just had to sit there and listen and learn, and eventually picked. And that has stayed with me to this very day. To this very day, I still sit at that drum, and part of that is it's been healing for me as well. Throughout my life, and the things I've being able to go back to those songs has been tremendous, and where I'm at today. So definitely.
That's thank you for sharing that so much. When did you see, or actually more like, when did you ever feel? I know you shared prior when we were talking before. There were times where let's just call it your pride of who you were, as a Shinnecock individual, were tested. And what tested those, and were they tested when you were young? When I've talked to some individuals who are immigrants or first or second generation, and they're like, oh yeah, we used to go to little Timmy's house, and Timmy had this, and I wanted to be like Timmy. So what do you remember when you were younger where you felt, oh, wait a second, like the American culture, is creeping in to our culture, and you might have been at a crossroads of where you wanted to go with that, and what did your journey look like with your culture? Because you do identify as an indigenous individual from the Shinnecock Nation, even though you do present as, and I'll share pictures on the website and stuff like that, you present as a Black American or an Afro American. So, yeah, tell us about that particular struggle or journey you had.
Yeah, definitely. So growing up, like I said, I grew up in ceremony, right? What I mean by ceremony is, we have some of our relatives from Oneida, Wisconsin, as well as up in the Dakotas, and they came to our land. They became really good family friends. And what they brought with them was called the Sweat Lodge, right? And that Sweat Lodge was introduced to my family. And I remember them building a sweat lodge in my backyard of my mother and father's home where I grew up. And I remember going into that sweat lodge. And actually, my first sweat lodge ever was in Canada when my dad built one. It was on a family. My dad built a sweat lodge. So I went into that sweat lodge before I even went into the one in my home, right? And so I'm saying this because this instilled in me pride. Instilled pride in me because I was part of this ceremony that was just so powerful for me, right? And I'm not going to get into too much of the details of that because we do consider, things that happen in there sacred, but it was in us at a very early age. And so with that being said, practicing those ways was, I guess you could say, for me personally, it may have been a gift and a curse because it did instill some pride, right? But also, growing up, I had long hair. I didn't have short hair like I have now. I had long hair, and I wore a left eye, and I wore a headband. You know what I mean? And I was teased. I was teased from my relatives at home. And I was teased when I went on the powwow trail and I would dance, and I was teased just because maybe I looked different. I ain't, like you said, I didn't look like your typical, stereotypical indigenous person. I had darker skin and I had wavier hair. And so I was even teased when I danced at powwows. I got called the N-word, right? And then I would go back home and I was getting teased because I wore my hair long and I had a braid, and my cousins would tease me about that, tease me how my hair texture was and how my braids look, and that hurt, man. But then I didn't know at that time, but eventually when I got older, I understood why those things happen. We can get into that in a little while, but But yeah, man, it was definitely difficult. It was definitely difficult. Going to a predominantly Caucasian school district, definitely experienced some racism, a lot of racism, honestly, a lot of racism. To this very out in the Hamptons, and I never forget, when it got to be a little too hard for me. It got to be a little bit too hard, and I remember not wanting to be Indian anymore, not wanting to be indigenous anymore because it was just so hard. It was just like I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. Like I wanted to share my culture and walk this way of life, and I was getting shade everywhere I turned, and that eventually led to another challenge that I had in my life, because it lowered my self-esteem and it lowered my pride, but at the same time, that culture and those ceremonies that never left. That never left. To this day, it has not left.
How did your parents react to the prejudice, racism? Do you remember? Well, it's twofold. Do you remember how they guided or instructed you to react to others when this was going on? And also, can you recall a time where you were growing up that you remember them actually facing and seeing them, or either facing prejudice or racism, and or having a conversation about it? I know that's a lot into one. You can start with your own experience, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I really don't. Because probably I didn't talk about it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, everybody
Sure.
knows in the schools, like we would fight a lot in schools. You know what I'm saying? Like there was a lot of that happening. But as far as having that conversation, I can't recall. It possibly could have happened, but I can't recall it. You know what I mean? And that could just be because I didn't speak up. You know, I didn't speak. I was getting teased on the bus ride home. You know, I didn't speak up when I was, getting teased or being called names when I was going to powwows. You know what I mean? I didn't. I don't believe I spoke up. So they may not have understood what I was actually going through. Because I do remember keeping a lot of stuff inside. I do remember that. I do remember going through depression. Especially in my teenage years. I definitely can recall that. And I didn't know what it was from at that time, but, I can pinpoint it a little bit better now. I can't recall like my dad and my mom sitting me down and asking me, trying to get in depth about what was going on. They may have, but I just don't remember. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But indirectly though, right? Like there was things done indirectly. And that, what I mean by that is that culture, man. You know what I mean? Making us still be prideful of who we are.
Did Black American culture or African American culture have any impact, or I guess did it have any impact on you when you were growing up as a teen? And I guess that's a loaded question, because as someone who presents as a Black American, obviously you have things like people look at you differently. But I'm wondering, just even culturally, did you listen to like hip hop music, or did you listen to traditional music? It's just interesting, and the way that these two cultures mashed up against each other.
Yeah, so I listened to everything, right? Definitely a hip hop head. Yeah, I remember growing up, Naughty by Nature. I always wanted to be like Tretch. Tretch was like my guy. I remember wearing a chain around my neck. You know what I mean? So I was like, Wu-Tang. I was definitely hip hop influence, right? But not only that, and I'm not going to generalize and say just Black culture. I'm going to say American culture. I'm going to say the outside culture, right? Because we got to remember, we're from the Hamptons. Our tribe is in the middle of the Hamptons, one of the most wealthiest places in America, right? About these 2 hours west, is New York City, right? So we had influences. Drugs.
Yeah.
Drugs was a big influence in our community, right? That whole scene, especially in the 90s and the 80s and the 90s, we had folks that were going out and bringing drugs back to our community, but that whole lifestyle, the clothing and the cars and all that, I remember wanting to be like them. I remember looking up to them and wanting to dress like them and wear their clothes and drive their cars, and that was a big influence. I never really dabbed in selling drugs, just trying to be cool and maybe, a little bit here and there, but I was never a drug dealer. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't consider a drug dealer, not even a drug dealer, just dipping and dabbing, but we had that influence for sure. For sure we had that influence,
What about your friends? Like, you went to a public school, it was mixed. Did you have friends from everywhere?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a very social guy. I have friends from all over, Black, Hispanic, whatever it is, definitely. Like, I'm very social. I do not discriminate. I love everyone. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I had friends from all walks of life. And to this very day, it's the same,
That's awesome. Were you able to share with say for instance your friends who were white identifying, like the white kids? Were you able to bring them to your house and show them your culture and introduce them to things that they might have never had a chance to be introduced to if they didn't know somebody from the
So
Shinnecock
one thing
Nation?
we do have is we have on every Labor Day weekend we have our annual powwow that is open to the public. So that is an opportunity for others from the outside to come and share our dances, share our songs, share our foods, right? So that was a big opportunity. But we had folks that wanted to come up and just hang out with us because I ain't gonna lie, we were the kind of coolest kids in the school. Like, everybody wants to get down with the res. That's just a fact, and
That's
that's crazy
awesome.
saying res, even though we're not a res, but that's like a slang term, right? Like they wanted to
Sure,
come
sure.
res, right? So we have folks that would come up and they would go hunting. I wasn't a big hunter. I did do a little bit of hunting with
Hmm.
my dad. My cousins, they were big hunters and they would have their friends, mostly white, will come up and want to go hunting with us, and that's a
Yeah,
traditional thing for us. So yeah, man, we definitely had folks that really wanted to be a part of where we came from. Like that, we were a big influence. Definitely, definitely.
that's cool. And a question, I'm just to also, I was just curious about. You said you did go to like a traditional church, but do you consider were the ceremonies that you speak of, are those considered religious or
No, no,
okay? Is there a did the Shinnecock did the Shinnecock Nation territory, do they is there such thing as a religion as we traditionally know it, or
no.
what does that look like?
So what it is too, because and you can go back to assimilation, you can go back to just the influence of the visitor's culture, right? European culture. So we do have the Presbyterian Church at home.
Hmm.
Definitely one of the churches, one of the oldest churches. It was actually, I believe the church, one of our original churches, was actually bought across the bay because our bay would freeze up in the winter and they slid it across the bay. I want to say that, but we do. So we do have a church. We actually have a couple different churches on the res. I'm not familiar with the other ones. I haven't been back home. I'm only going home sporadically now, but I remember growing up and going to the Presbyterian church. That's what I remember, right?
Oh, right
And
on.
yeah, so I remember that. But when I say traditional, that's spirituality, right? That's
Yeah.
spirituality. That's being able to have your own experience. When I'm going into that lodge
Mm,
experience, I'm having my
yeah.
own with my higher power, my creator. You see what I'm saying? So I'm
Yep.
not of of what and this is how I decipher religion and spirituality. I think religion is an experience that is based off somebody else's experience, as for spirituality's own experience, right? I had that epiphany.
Mm,
I had that that spiritual experience. I seen those spirits. I felt those spirits.
yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's my way, right? That cultural meaning, that cultural spiritual connection to my higher power, to our
Yeah.
ancestors. Like that's my that I had with them. Um, and so that's what I mean when I was raised traditionally in spirituality, is because we were able to go into that lodge and have our own experiences. You know,
Yeah.
sing those songs, those sacred songs that are sung. You know, um, yeah, it was wild, man. Like, and I can't get too much detail. It gets a little deep, man. But
Yeah.
seen some things growing up, my man. I seen some things growing.
Did the Presbyterian version of God cause any psychological conflict as far as I mean, as a kid, like they're like, oh, you're going to go to this version of hell or whatever.
Oh
Was
yeah,
there?
yeah, man. Like, I mean, I guess so. I mean, growing up, it's like, damn, if I don't do good, I'm going to hell, right? But what the heck is hell? What does that mean? You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
fire and all this stuff, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's just natural. Just growing up, that's natural.
Yeah.
You hear you know, but you know, as you get older and you start to identify, you start to understand the meanings behind ceremonies and all these, you know, all the different teachings. That's what it is. The different
Yeah.
teachings that come with it, and then you start to have your own experiences, right? I no
Mm-hmm.
longer believe in. I don't believe in the heaven and hell. You know, I don't. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Yeah.
you believe in the spirit world. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is a spirit world, and that's what I prepare myself for. Like that's where I believe that I'm going. And so right now in this world, this physical world, right now, I'm working on my spiritual tools so I can
Mm-hmm.
have a journey to the spirit world. And what does that mean? My spiritual tools. That means doing things that I know that are good for myself, but also for others. Things that I do to help others that make me feel good, but help somebody else. That's feeling my spirit. You know.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's take a little bit of a step back. You know, you were a teen. When you were a teen, you were going through some things. You kind of started to have some struggles. Were those struggles with substances? Were those in your teen or teenage years, or were they a little bit later? And where did that take you on your journey?
Yeah, so I want to say around 15 years old, and I always blamed it on my mother and father getting a divorce. That's what I thought that trigger was. That's why I thought
Mm.
substance. And I remember the night. I was with my older bro, and we got into. And when I say my brother, you know, we're not biologically brothers, but you know, we're brothers. We grew up like that. So I was, you know, we got into the stash, and I blacked out, and my younger brothers beat me up and threw me all over because I was acting a fool. And I remember all that, right? So that, but it triggered something for me. Even though I blacked out, I kind of don't remember like the ending of that night. I wanted to do it again for some reason. I wanted to do it
Mm.
again. And so I continued. And I was probably became alcoholic. I was late teens, early 20s. I was already an alcoholic, you know? And I
Yeah.
continued that for quite some time. Actually till about 37 years old, man. So I had a nice little run drinking and drugging, and it wasn't until you know I had to go sit down in the county jail for a little bit, and I read a certain book, and it talked about intergenerational trauma and historical trauma. And once I understood what that meant, I was like, oh shit, wait a minute. I didn't drink because my mom and dad, you know, got divorced. That wasn't the reason at all. I drank because I had a self-esteem issue because I was getting teased, right? I was getting teased because of the
Mm.
color of my skin and the texture of my hair, because I sang and I danced, because I went to ceremonies, and not everybody else did that. Maybe it was a jealousy thing. Maybe they wanted what I had, and that was their way
Yeah.
of releasing that or telling me that. You know, I don't know what it was, but I know that I can go back now and say that was the reason why it suppressed my feelings. Right?
Yeah.
That's what I was for, a relief. You know, but then what did I say in the beginning? Culture has been instrumental in my life, and so being on that journey of using, you know, substances to suppress, that culture was still there, you know, and it saved my life. It saved my life being able to go back to smudging and using our tobacco and our cultural medicines, being able to pray again, being able to talk to my creator again, being able to go back and sing those songs. That's what healed me because it was already in me. It was already instilled in me,
Yeah.
you know.
And you have a beautiful story about your company. You're going to tell us about your company that you run, but you have a beautiful story on the transformation. One of the transformation points of this journey, and how it affected the trajectory of this company and of your life. So, will you share that?
Yeah, so I'm wearing right now, right? Evertan Katora. Evertan, Evitan, Evitan is native spelt backwards. spots. And then Katora is like high-end, flashy, that kind of thing, right? And this was actually created by my late brother. His name is Jason. His street name is Tech. His last name is King. And I never forget, it was about 2009, 2008, 2009. I was living in Rio Rancho. I had 2 boys at the time. I was raising them with their mom. And my brother called me up and he's like, "Y'all want to do a clothing line?" Because this man was very talented. He was an artist. He was a visionary. And this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to do a clothing line. I'm like, "All right, but what the heck you want me to do? I'm not an artist. I'm not anything." But he knew I was in school for business. He said, "I want you to be the business head. I want you to help me develop it." And so I never forget, he sent me a to-do packet. I think I still have it back in New York. It was a to-do packet. And he gave me all the things he wanted me to do, including pick out the logo. So he actually created this logo. He created this logo from scratch. He drew it and he got it trademarked and whatnot, right? And so we had our first fashion show, I believe it was 2010, back in New York during our Labor Day powwow, right? And so things were moving. People liked it. It was gaining some traction. And tragically, April 28th, 2012, he passed away in a tragic car accident, along with another relative of mine. They were in the front. My brother Tech was driving. My other cousin DL was in the passenger, and they tragically hit a tree at the bottom of our territory. There's a big tree there that they hit, and they died instantly. And then the 2 passengers in the back, they survived. One has since passed on. Young man, young relative, young cousin of mine has since passed on. And so they have one other survivor from that car wreck. My brother, my other brothers, has survived, and he still struggles with that survivor's remorse and whatnot, right? So that was 2012, and at that time, I had decided to move back to New York. I was taking a break, and I had brought my 2 boys back to New York with me so they can experience a little bit back home. And so we did that, but I got really bad. I got really bad. So my boys, it's not the reason why they went back to New Mexico, but they went back to New Mexico with their mom after spending a semester out in school. And so I got pretty bad in my addiction. Right? I got pretty bad in my addiction. And it wasn't until January 9th, 2018, I was actually fighting a case. I was in drug court. And while in drug court, I was still using. I was still, getting high. And I gave a dirty urine. And I didn't confess that I was still using. And the judge was like, "All right, put your hands behind the back. Go sit down for a little bit. Go sit down, think about your life." Right? I did. So I sat down, and that's why I read that book called The Red Road to Sobriety, which allowed me to understand my traumas. And also I had an epiphany there, right? And that was thinking on that cell bed, laying in a cell bed, thinking about what the hell am I going to do when I get out? And how the hell did I get here? I'm in jail. This is where my life has taken me. This is where my substance use has taken me, right? And so I had a thought in my mind, what am I going to do when I get out? And that thought was Evertan Katora. And at that time, I'm laying on a cell bed, I'm looking at the ceiling, and I promise you this is so true. I had that thought, Evertan Katora. And as my eyes went from the cell ceiling, my eyes went down over the cell door, and long and behold, the words Tech King, my brother's name, was engraved in this cell door. As I had that Evertan Katora. So that tells me I was supposed to go through this process. I was supposed to get caught. I was supposed to go in jail. And this is where my healing journey would begin. Right? This was supposed to happen.
Yep.
I was connecting the dots in my life. And so I broke down. The OG in the tier of the jail was like, "Moon, you better get your ass out. Go back to New Mexico to be with your kids. And you better do Evitan. If not, I'm coming to find you." That's exactly what he told me. And so I get out, I go to a sober living home, and I walk to Walmart because I'm stripped of everything. I have no transportation. I'm walking on foot. I walk to Walmart. I buy a sweatsuit and some transfer paper. I walk to the town library. I printed out the logo on a transfer paper. I went back down to the basement of a sober house, and I made a sweatsuit. And I wore it one day, and my cousin liked it. And I was like, "What? You like it?" I said, "It looks like it's handmade." He's like, "Dude, that shit is fly." I'm like, "All right, take a picture, post it." So he took a picture and he posted it, and I've been on a hustle, on a grind ever since. We had our first celebrity wear it on national TV last year. Super grateful for my man Norm. To give a shout out to Noriega and Drink Champs for wearing the sweatsuit that I made him in my apartment. Super grateful for that, and we just been rocking and rolling ever since, man. So, I had to sit back and look at my life and connect the dots and truly realize everything happens for a reason.
Wow, everything. What a beautiful man. Thank you so much for sharing that, and my condolences to to you on those losses and the families that lost, your brothers and your cousins. Man, that's tough. That's really, really tough. So, transitioning a little bit, you're a full-time dad now. You do peer support work. You run an Evitan. Let's talk a little bit about how you still or how you keep your sons connected to the Shinnecock culture. I know you mentioned your son's mother is from the Pueblo Nation. How are your sons receptive to their culture, their heritage? And when you're sharing about, hey, you know what, this is interesting. You should listen up here. This is something about your father or your grandma, your grandpa, or about our people. What does that relationship look like as you try to carry on the heritage of the Shinnecock people with your offspring?
Yeah, definitely. So my children are very immersed in their culture here. They come from the Jemez Pueblo as well as the Cochiti Pueblo here in New Mexico, and they are extremely immersed in the Jemez culture here, like very immersed. Jemez is their first language, right? So they spoke that before they spoke anything, right? So I'm super grateful for that. I'm super grateful that their mom has kept them very immersed in the culture here, right? To this very day, they participate in all their cultural doings here in New Mexico, and so they did have a taste of what our culture was in Shinnecock, right? They learned how to dance when they were younger. They no longer dance in our way anymore, but that's just because they weren't out there enough, right? But they did. They had a taste of that. They learned how to dance. They sing. They can still sing with me at that drum. I had to sing with me at that drum. But more importantly, I needed to provide them what was never provided to me, and that is their fast, their vision quest. And so a couple of years ago, oldest son turned 15, and I knew it was that time for him to go out and do his fasting back at home. And this was something that hadn't been done in quite some time. There's only a handful of people that actually went on that ceremony in recent memory, probably in the past 100 years, that actually went out and did this ceremony. And so I put it together, and my son was receptive. He wanted to do it, and it's a very hard thing to do. No food, no water for 2 days. Was it 3 days, 2 nights, something like that? Yeah, 3 days and 2 nights. They couldn't eat or drink any water. And in the summertime, in humidity, in the Hamptons, right? It was right? And so I was able to provide that ceremony for my son. Very, very powerful ceremony. He did it along with my nephew. And so my son was able to get that experience and struggle and make it through that struggle and pray and learn to pray on his own and survive on his own in nature. Creating his own shelter, creating his own fire, learning how to pray, watching out for the messages that may come. And I'm not going to share, too much about that experience because that's his personal experience and that's his way of, that has to be kept sacred. But that was something that I was able to give him and that he remembers, so that he can carry on and teach his offspring. And now this year, I have to do it for my other boys. This year, we're planning on going back home so my other sons can have their experience, right? And that's what makes them whole, is they have that experience from Shinnecock, and then they have their doings and their cultural practices here in New Mexico, and that makes them whole. They understand who they are, right? Of course they can learn more. Of course they can learn a language if it was actually spoken to them. I'm not fluent in my language. Not too many people are in our language, so I couldn't give them that. I could give them what I was able to, and I'm super grateful I was able to give them that ceremony. You know what I mean? Because I haven't had any drinking issue with them. I haven't had any drug issues with my boys, and they're in their late, teenage years now, right? Yeah. I have to believe this because culture has taught them better. it's been such an
Yeah.
influence. Taught them better, you know.
Yeah, and you're showing up, man. Like, I mean, that's huge too, man. Like, you're showing up, and it's great that you're passing on those types of traditions. I think one thing that, and I'm going to have to say, like, talking to you, I think one thing that that I don't know if it's envy or jealous of like indigenous tribes, is that really deep cultural connection to the earth and those things that draw who we are out of us, so that we recognize who we are on the inside, you know. And I just think those things are amazing and beautiful. Do you feel any, or do you feel sad or resentful at all in any way with the way that the evolution of the Shinnecock culture is going now? Are you like, wait, we could work harder to preserve these parts of it? I know you're doing it with your kids. You know, it's you know, everything evolves, right? You know, but I'm just wondering if you have those thoughts about you know, your roots.
So honestly, when it comes to our tribe, like I go back home several times a year, and I'm actually very proud of what's happening. I am. I am. I see changes. We have this amazing preschool on our on our territory right now, which is teaching our young people the language. They are, man. They're learning, which is super, super motivating. It's super powerful to see. A lot of our children, our Boys and Girls Club, is doing an amazing job preserving our culture. They have a dance troupe. So just imagine these young people, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, going out and representing their culture, going out to different schools throughout the country pretty much, and letting know who they are, where they come from, and where they come from, and sharing that with others, right? I see that, man. I see ceremonies coming back. I see our history, people writing books about our history, people going out in the world and sharing our history, letting people know that we're still here. You know, we're welcoming people. We can come visit us. You know, we share our culture with others. You know, also we have to be protective, but at the same time, we want people to know that we are still here. We are original people of this land, of this part of North America, and we are still here and we're still thriving. You know, so I see that happening. You know, I see development happening at our home to empower our young people, to empower our elders. So I'm actually really excited. I'm excited. Obviously, there's things that can be changed, or I feel that can be changed. You know, but I'm not gonna get into any kind of political views on that. You know, I like to focus on the positive. I like to focus on the positive.
Yeah, yeah.
You to support that. You know what I mean? And and,
And
and so
any wisdom you want to pass on to young kids that might be on a similar path that you were, you know, growing up in the territory, and maybe now even more than anything, that American culture smashing on them, so they're questioning, like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? What would you say to those kids that, you know, that they don't understand? They might not understand about the importance of what the culture has done for you growing up.
I'm gonna give you an example. How about that? I'm gonna give you an example.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
My nephew, who is doing an amazing young man right now, is actually in California. I believe is in the I want to say the Navy, right? And so this young man, he he became very involved in our culture, right? And that was through him hanging out with me and going to ceremony and going to powwows. And I never forget this. This was actually a few years ago. He posted on his Instagram, and he talked about going through his struggles. He talked about, maybe going through some hard times. And then he talked about, but when he puts on his regalia and he dances his style of dance, which at that time was called an Eastern War dance, which is one of our traditional dances. And he said when he did that, everything goes away. Everything goes away. Those songs and those dances just make him feel so good about who he is and where he comes from. And that sums it up. That sums it up.
Yeah.
That shows the true power of understanding who you are, where you come from, and also practicing those ways. And
Yeah.
I actually just talked to his mom a couple of weeks ago to see how he's doing. And he's doing great. He's a great young man. And but for him to say that, and he's like, and he thanked me. He thanked me on that post. And I'm getting emotional right now because that's what I'm here to do, bro. Because I know the struggle. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know the struggle. I know what it feels like to be down and out and so unsure and insecure and all those things, man. But I also know what it feels like just to be so be prideful, and be happy of who I am, where I come from, and being able to share that with others. And that's one thing, man. Even like Endus, there's I'm gonna get on a talking circle here in a little while, and we have our relatives from the Haudenosaunee people, upstate New York, Akwesasne. Better known, you guys may know them as the Mohawk people, but they're from the Akwesasne people. And they have this term, and that term is called Gunalunkwa. And what that means, what it translates to, is I share my medicine with you. I care for you, and I love you. So that's what I do now, right? Gunalunkwa, share my medicine. I share my medicine with others in the hopes that medicine will help them. And in turn, they can share their medicine with others.
Wow. Well, you shared your medicine with me today, man. Like, yeah, you shared your medicine with me. So many more questions I can ask you, and I'm sure we'll have conversations in the future. I know you're headed up this way, so I'm hoping we'd be able to connect on the ground and give each other a big hug. And where can people find? Yeah. Where can people find you, and what do you want to plug? And I'm going to share, information about you and links on our website too, and on social. But what do you want to say? And you said you would take us out with the song after you share what you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely plug my Instagram, man. It's Evitan, EVITAN_KS. That's my Instagram handle. Definitely follow me on Instagram. That's where I promote all the new merch. You can see Nori from Drink Champs rocking it. You can see his manager rocking it. You can see his best friend rocking it. Sunny D on there rocking it. Definitely look out for the new drops coming up. I'm also on Facebook under my name, Weyhan Smith. Also, Evertan Katora has his Facebook page. I don't promote too much on Facebook, but definitely Instagram, hit me up. Search my name on YouTube. I have some videos up there that talks about my recovery journey. And I'm just trying to get out there, man. So I truly appreciate this opportunity. I truly appreciate you reaching out, my brother. And what I would like to do is take you out with the song. We talked a lot about culture here today, bro. And we talked a lot about song. And so this song that I'll sing is a thank you song. And it's thanking you. It's thanking you for this opportunity, man.
Thank you.
And all it says is thank you. Thank you, Creator, in our way. Tayabani get you my Tabutni Tayabani get you. So this is a song that was created by one of my relatives, one of my bros back at home. We sing this often, and it's a give thanks, man. So I'll sing a verse of this, bro, and we'll end it like that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Love you, man. Thank you very, very much, man.
Appreciate you, bro.
Thank you for joining us for the Multiracial Verse podcast. My name is Antonio Fernandez. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Huge shout out to my friend Johannes Skoda for mixing and creating the intro music, and DJ Kazam for the track.